Tonight, nothing needs your attention. Nothing needs to be followed. The sea moves slowly in the dark. A lighthouse stands quietly by the shore, and a keeper begins another calm, uneventful day. This is a story where very little happens, and that is exactly why you can rest. The lighthouse stands on a quiet stretch of rock where the sea moves in a slow and patient rhythm. The air here often feels damp and heavy, carrying the mild scent of salt and seaweed that never fully leaves the stones. Each morning begins the same way for the keeper, long before the light of the sun has fully reached the horizon. He wakes in a narrow bed inside the small stone room at the base of the tower, where the walls feel cool and slightly moist to the touch. There is no sudden movement when he rises, only a gradual shifting from sleep into awareness, followed by the familiar act of sitting up and placing his feet carefully onto the cold floor. He dresses slowly in the dim gray light that filters through the small window. His clothes are simple and practical, thick enough to guard against the wind that often presses against the tower. There is no need to hurry. The sea will still be there. The tower will still be there. The work will wait in the same patient way it always does. He moves toward the narrow staircase that coils upward inside the lighthouse. The stone steps are worn smooth from many years of careful use. His hand rests lightly against the inner wall as he climbs, step by step, in a steady pattern he has repeated countless times before. The air becomes slightly cooler as he rises, and he can hear the faint, distant sound of water touching the rocks below. At the top, he opens the small door to the lantern room and looks out through the glass panes. The horizon is pale and indistinct, blending softly with the sky. Nothing appears urgent. Nothing changes quickly here. The keeper simply stands for a moment, observing the stillness before beginning the quiet routine that marks the start of every day. The keeper begins his morning by checking the lantern room in a slow and practiced manner. He walks around the circular space with careful steps, observing the glass panes that face the sea in every direction. A thin film of moisture often settles on the inside during the night, so he takes a soft cloth from a small wooden shelf and wipes each panel with steady, unhurried movements. The cloth moves in small circles. The glass becomes slightly clearer. The horizon outside remains pale and distant. When the glass is clean, he turns his attention to the lamp itself. The metal frame feels cool beneath his fingers. He inspects the wick, trimming away the darkened edge with a small pair of scissors he keeps in his pocket. This task is never rushed. The trimming must be even, and the wick must sit just right within its holder. He has done this so many times that his hands no longer need guidance from his thoughts. Next, he checks the oil reservoir. He lifts the lid and peers inside, estimating the level by sight. If it has lowered during the night, he refills it from a tin container stored in the corner of the room. The oil pours in a slow and quiet stream. There is no spilling. There is no sound except the faint glug of liquid settling into place. After the lamp is tended, he steps back and stands for a short while, simply looking at it. The lantern does not demand attention now. It rests in silence, waiting for the coming evening when it will once again send its steady beam across the water. He then opens the small window vent to let the cool morning air pass through the room. A gentle draft moves around him, carrying the distant smell of the sea. Nothing changes quickly. The light outside grows only slightly brighter. The keeper remains still for a moment longer before beginning the slow descent down the spiral stairs to continue the quiet tasks of the day. He reaches the base of the tower and steps into the small living space that serves as his kitchen and resting area. The room is simple and orderly, with a wooden table near the window and a narrow shelf that holds a few basic items. Morning light enters slowly through the glass, casting a pale and gentle glow across the floor. The keeper moves without hurry, aware that the day will unfold in the same quiet pattern as all the others before it. He begins by preparing a modest meal. From a small cupboard, he takes a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth and a tin that holds preserved fish. He cuts the bread into even slices with a short knife, placing them neatly on a plate. The knife makes a soft, dull sound as it meets the wooden surface of the table. He opens the tin carefully and arranges the contents beside the bread. There is no variation in this routine. Each movement follows the same order he has practiced for many years. He fills a kettle with water from a covered container and places it on the small stove. The flame beneath it burns quietly, producing a faint and steady warmth. He waits beside the stove, listening to the gradual change in sound as the water begins to heat. There is no impatience in this waiting. It is simply another part of the morning. When the water is ready, he pours it into a cup and adds a small amount of dried leaves to make a simple drink. He carries the cup and the plate to the table and sits down on the wooden chair that stands in the same place every day. He eats slowly, looking out of the window toward the sea, which moves in a soft and distant rhythm against the rocks. Nothing outside demands his attention. No boats pass by at this hour. No voices reach the shore. The only sound is the faint movement of water and the quiet room around him as he finishes his meal and prepares to continue the gentle duties that fill his time. After he finishes his meal, the keeper clears the table with the same steady care he uses for every task. He folds the cloth around the remaining bread and returns it to the cupboard. The empty tin is rinsed with a small amount of water and placed upside down near the sink to dry. The cup is wiped clean and set back onto the shelf in its usual place. Nothing is left out of order. The room returns to its quiet stillness within a few minutes. He then takes a small broom from the corner and begins to sweep the floor. The bristles move slowly across the wooden boards, gathering the fine grains of sand that always seem to appear near the doorway. The motion is gentle and unhurried. He works from one side of the room to the other, following the same path each morning. When the floor is clear, he opens the door and brushes the sand outside, letting it fall back onto the ground where it belongs. Stepping out into the open air, he pauses for a moment to observe the sky. The clouds drift without urgency, and the light has grown slightly stronger since earlier. The air carries a faint coolness that lingers from the night. He takes a slow breath and walks along the narrow path that circles the base of the lighthouse. His next task is to inspect the exterior walls. He runs his hand lightly over the stone surface, feeling for any dampness or loose fragments. The sea air is harsh over time, and small changes can appear without warning. He does not look for anything specific. He simply follows the routine of touching and observing. When he reaches the side facing the water, he stops and looks out across the wide surface of the sea. The waves move in a steady pattern, rising and falling with quiet repetition. There is no sudden motion, no dramatic change. The keeper stands there for a while, watching the gentle rhythm before continuing his slow walk around the structure, completing the careful inspection that begins each calm and uneventful day. By late morning, the keeper returns inside and sits at the small desk near the wall, where he keeps a worn notebook and a stub of a pencil. This is where he records the simple details of each day. He writes the date in careful letters, then notes the weather, the direction of the wind, and the general state of the sea. His handwriting is steady and familiar. There is no need to think about what to write. The same observations are made every day, with only slight changes in wording. After closing the notebook, he folds his hands for a moment and listens to the quiet around him. The lighthouse does not creak or shift. The air inside is still. He can faintly hear the distant movement of water against the rocks below, a low and constant sound that never fully disappears. It has become part of the background of his thoughts, something he notices without needing to focus on it. He then stands and moves toward a small wooden box where he keeps a few tools. From it, he takes a cloth and a small brush used for dusting. He begins to wipe the surfaces of the shelves, the table, and the narrow windowsills. Dust gathers slowly in such a place, carried in by the wind and settling quietly over time. The cleaning is not urgent. It is done simply because it is time to do it. Each movement is slow and measured. He lifts objects one at a time, wipes beneath them, and returns them to their exact positions. A small tin cup, a folded map, a spare lantern wick. All are handled in the same careful way. The routine has no variation. It is a gentle repetition that fills the space between the larger tasks of the day. When the dusting is complete, he opens the door again and steps outside to sit on the low wooden bench that rests against the lighthouse wall. From here, he can see the wide stretch of water and the rocky shoreline that curves away in both directions. The tide has shifted slightly since morning, revealing darker stones that were hidden before. He sits without speaking, without moving much at all, simply observing the slow passage of time as the light in the sky continues its gradual change and the steady rhythm of the sea continues without interruption. Around midday, the keeper rises from the bench and walks slowly back inside. The light entering through the small windows now appears softer and more even, spreading gently across the wooden floor and the plain walls. He moves without haste toward the narrow shelf where a small kettle rests, and he fills it with water from a covered container. The sound of water pouring is quiet and brief. He places the kettle over a modest heat source and waits without distraction as the water begins its gradual warming. There is no clock to watch, no measure of time beyond the familiar sense of when the task is complete. While he waits, he stands near the table and rests his hands lightly on its surface, feeling the smooth wood beneath his palms. His eyes drift toward the window, where the sea continues its slow and steady motion, unchanged and calm. When the water is ready, He prepares a simple drink and pours it carefully into the same tin cup he uses each day. He sits down and takes small, unhurried sips, allowing the warmth to settle gently. After finishing, he rinses the cup with a small amount of water and places it upside down to dry. He then walks toward the staircase that curves upward inside the lighthouse, placing one hand on the railing as he begins to climb. Each step is taken with the same measured pace. The spiral path familiar to his feet. The air grows slightly warmer as he nears the top, and the faint scent of oil and metal becomes more noticeable. When he reaches the lantern room, he pauses briefly before beginning the quiet inspection that is part of every day, checking the glass for marks, the metal for signs of wear, and the mechanism for any small change. He moves slowly around the circular space, following the same order he always follows, ensuring that everything remains as it should be, completing the calm and careful routine without any need for urgency. After completing the inspection in the lantern room, the keeper remains there for a while, standing near the glass and looking outward at the wide horizon. The height offers a broader view of the sea and the distant line where water meets sky. The colors remain soft and muted, with no sharp contrast or sudden change. He rests his hands lightly on the metal railing that circles the room and allows his eyes to follow the slow movement of the waves far below. Nothing draws his attention for long. Everything moves with the same gentle rhythm. After some time, he begins to wipe the inside of the glass panels with a clean cloth, moving in small circular motions, removing faint traces of salt left behind by the sea air. He works methodically from one panel to the next, careful not to leave streaks. When the glass is clear, he folds the cloth neatly and places it back in its usual spot. He then checks the lantern mechanism once more, turning a small handle slightly to confirm its smooth motion, listening to the quiet sound it makes as it moves. Satisfied that all is in order, he walks toward the staircase and begins the slow descent. His steps echo softly against the inner walls as he returns to the lower level. The air inside feels cooler again, and the familiar stillness welcomes him back. He pauses near the doorway and looks out once more at the steady daylight, noticing how the shadows have shifted slightly since morning. Then he returns to the table and sits down, resting his hands in his lap. allowing the calm passage of the afternoon to continue without interruption, as the quiet routine of the day carries on in its unchanging and predictable way. During the quiet stretch of the afternoon, the keeper remains seated at the table for a long while, his posture relaxed and unchanged. The light from the window now leaning at a softer angle across the floor, creating long, pale shapes that move so slowly they are almost impossible to notice. He watches these shapes without really thinking about them, simply aware that time is passing in the gentle way it always does here. After some time, he rises and walks toward a small cupboard set into the wall, opening it carefully and looking at the few supplies stored inside. A folded cloth, a small container of oil, a bundle of spare wicks, and a simple loaf of bread wrapped in fabric. He takes the bread and places it on the table, cutting a small piece with a short knife that has grown dull from years of use. He eats slowly and without distraction, chewing in a steady rhythm while listening to the faint sound of wind moving around the outside of the lighthouse. When he is finished, he wraps the remaining bread and returns it to the cupboard, wiping the table with his hand to clear away the few crumbs left behind. He then walks to the doorway and steps outside once more, the air slightly cooler now, carrying a mild scent of salt and stone. He walks a short distance along the worn path near the lighthouse, his steps careful on the uneven ground. He looks down occasionally to avoid loose rocks, then looks back out toward the water where nothing has changed in any noticeable way. The sea continues its slow movement. The horizon remains steady and wide. After walking only a short distance, he turns back and returns to the door, stepping inside and closing it gently behind him. He sits again on the wooden bench just inside the entrance and rests his back against the wall, his hands folded loosely together, his breathing even and quiet. He does not think about what comes next because there is no need to plan. The remainder of the day will unfold in the same simple order as every other day, with the same small tasks and the same calm observations. As the soft afternoon light gradually fades toward the early signs of evening, and the steady silence of the lighthouse continues to surround him without interruption. As the afternoon slowly gives way to early evening, the keeper notices the gradual dimming of the light inside the lighthouse. The brightness that filled the room earlier, now replaced by a softer and more muted glow. He stands from the bench and moves toward the small shelf where he keeps a lantern used for the lower level. He checks the oil inside with a careful glance and adjusts the wick slightly with his fingers, making sure it will burn evenly when needed. He does not light it yet. He simply prepares it as part of the routine that marks the end of the day. After setting the lantern back in its place, he walks toward the narrow window and looks out at the sea once more. The surface appears darker now, reflecting the fading light of the sky. The waves continue their slow and familiar motion, unchanged by the time of day. He rests his hand on the wooden frame of the window and remains still for a while, listening to the low sound of water moving against the rocks below. When he turns away, he walks to the table and places his hands on its surface, feeling the cool wood beneath his palms. He then begins to prepare for the evening task that never varies. He moves toward the staircase and begins the steady climb upward once again, his steps measured and unhurried as always, the air growing warmer and slightly heavier as he ascends. When he reaches the lantern room, he pauses to let his breathing settle into its calm rhythm. Then he begins the familiar process of readying the great light for the night ahead, checking each part with slow and careful movements, ensuring that everything is as it should be before darkness fully arrives, continuing the quiet and predictable routine that has shaped every evening in the same gentle and unchanging way. As darkness settles gradually over the sea, the keeper remains in the lantern room, moving with the same slow and practiced care that has guided every evening before this one. He lights the lamp with steady hands and watches the small flame grow brighter, reflecting softly against the curved glass panels that surround him. He adjusts the mechanism with slight turns of a handle, ensuring that the light will rotate smoothly through the night without interruption. The gentle ticking sound that follows is familiar and comforting, marking the steady passage of time in a way that requires no attention. Once the light is fully set, he walks around the circular room once more, checking the glass, the metal frame, and the base of the lantern to confirm that nothing has shifted. Satisfied that all is in order, he moves toward the staircase and begins the careful descent back to the lower level, the echo of his steps soft against the inner walls. When he reaches the main room, he lights the smaller lantern he prepared earlier and places it on the table, its warm glow filling the space with a gentle and even light. He sits down and rests his hands on his knees, listening to the distant sound of waves and the faint mechanical rhythm from above. He remains there without movement for a long while, allowing the quiet of the night to settle around him, knowing that the light above will continue its silent work without needing his presence for many hours, as the steady and predictable calm of the lighthouse carries on into the darkness in the same slow and reassuring way it always has. The night continues without any clear division between one moment and the next, and the keeper remains awake but unhurried, sitting at the wooden table with his back straight and his feet flat on the floor. The small lantern beside him burns evenly and does not flicker, its light spreading across the worn surface of the table and the nearby walls in a soft and predictable way. He reaches out from time to time to adjust the wick by a small amount, not because it is necessary, but because the motion is familiar and steady. His breathing remains slow and quiet, matching the rhythm of the waves that reach the rocks below the tower. Outside the lighthouse, the sea moves in a wide and patient pattern, waves arriving and retreating without urgency, repeating the same motion as they have done through many nights. Inside, the keeper listens without reacting, the sound blending into the background of his thoughts until it no longer feels separate from silence. After a while, he stands and walks across the room, checking the door and the narrow window, confirming that both remain closed and unchanged. He pauses near the wall where his coat hangs and smooths the fabric with one hand, then leaves it where it is, returning to his chair without any sign of haste. The stairs leading upward remain empty, and the light above continues its slow rotation, unseen but dependable. The keeper does not look up because he already knows the pattern will not change. Hours pass in this way, marked only by the gradual cooling of the air and the subtle shift of shadows along the floor. He occasionally stretches his fingers or shifts his weight, small movements that keep his body comfortable without disturbing the calm of the room. The lantern beside him grows slightly dimmer, and he trims the wick again, restoring the same level of light as before. Nothing else requires his attention, and so he sits, listening, waiting, not for any event, but simply allowing time to move forward on its own. The lighthouse stands firm around him, the walls thick and unmoving, the floor solid beneath his feet. The keeper remains part of this steady structure, present but unobtrusive, as the night continues onward, quiet and unchanged, carrying both the light and the keeper through the final hours before morning. The keeper moves more slowly now. The small rooms feel softer in the late hour. The air is heavy with salt and quiet. The lantern above turns in its patient circle, sending a pale light across the dark water, then pulling it back again, over and over in the same rhythm, the same distance, the same silence. The steps across the floor are careful and light, as if the boards themselves are resting. The table remains where it has always been. The chair remains near the wall. Nothing asks to be moved. Nothing asks to be changed. The sound of the sea below is lower now. Not loud, not sharp, only present, like a long breath that never ends. The keeper checks the small clock without hurry. The hands move in their slow path, marking time without urgency. The glass of the window holds only darkness and a faint reflection of the room behind. The tools are placed back into their places, one by one, each with a familiar motion, each with a familiar pause. The cloth is folded carefully. The matches are set aside. The lantern continues its endless turning, the same light crossing the same line of night. The keeper sits for a moment, not to think, not to plan, only to remain still. The body feels heavy. The eyes rest without closing. The air does not change. The silence does not change. Everything stays in its quiet pattern. The sea moves far below without being seen, only heard in its distant repetition. The keeper stands again without reason, walks a short distance across the room, then stops, then turns, then stands once more, as if movement itself has become part of the routine, part of the long night that does not ask for anything new. The lantern turns. The shadows shift gently across the wall, then return to where they were. The same shapes, the same softness, the same slow passing of time. The keeper leans lightly against the wall, feeling the cool stone through the clothes, listening to the air, listening to the sea, listening to nothing in particular. The night continues without change, without event, without end, and the light continues its steady path through the darkness, over the water, into the distance, and back again. And the keeper remains there in the quiet room, breathing slowly, standing without thought, while the lantern turns, and the sea breathes, and the night moves forward in its calm, unbroken, endless rhythm.